Good morning, neighbors. It's a beautiful day here on the homestead. We're out in the garden and we're talking about tomatoes. Let's get started. The first tip I want to share with you is when you're planting your tomato plants, and that's to simply bury them deep. All along your tomato stem, it will sprout roots. So the deeper you plant that plant, it'll have a stronger root system, a stronger stalk that will be able to hold up to a little more weight. So plant those things deep. I know we've had the issue where we had some really leggy transplants. In other words, the stem was very thin and long. But you bury them deep, it'll help build that strong root system. It'll give you a nice, thick, healthy stalk that will help support that plant as it grows. Tip number 2, beware of high nitrogen fertilizer. It'll create a big bushy plant and it'll look great, but the fruit will be lacking. So beware of that. Make sure when you're fertilizing your tomatoes, especially when they're fruiting and blossoming, not to use a high nitrogen fertilizer. You can find tomato specific fertilizers that have a little bit lower nitrogen content, but beware of that. If you use Miracle-Gro, we use Miracle-Gro especially early on. Make sure you use the Miracle-Gro that is formulated for tomatoes. Using the right fertilizer will give you a great result and you'll have great looking tomatoes. Tip number 3, choose the right variety. Now, let's talk about a couple things there. Let's talk about, first of all, tomatoes can be separated into 2 categories, determinate and indeterminate. Now, let's talk about that. All the tomatoes that we have planted in our garden are indeterminate tomatoes. So let's talk about what the difference is. A determinate tomato is self-topping. In other words, it will grow so high and it will stop. It will not continue to grow and grow and grow. It will grow to a certain height and it will stop. The key difference is that a determinate tomato will produce all of its fruit in a given amount of time. Whereas an indeterminate tomato, the plant will continue to grow and continue to have blossoms and will continue to produce fruit for a longer period of time. You can see these are indeterminate tomatoes, and you can see there's fruit here on these tomatoes, but you also, if you look closely, you can see we're still getting blossoms. This plant will continue to fruit throughout the season. Now, so why would you choose a determinate plant? Or why would you choose an indeterminate plant? Well, it depends on what you're going to do with the tomatoes. Let's say if you're intending to can a lot of tomatoes, you might want a determinate variety, a variety that produces all of its fruit in a short amount of time and all of it's going to be pretty much ready to harvest at the same time. That'll give you that'll give you a lot of fruit so that you can do your canning and you can get a lot done there. Whereas indeterminate tomatoes are going to bear throughout the whole growing season. You're going to have fruit trickling in through the whole growing season, which may not be the best for canning. But if you prefer just to eat tomatoes fresh, just out of hand eating, then an indeterminate is the way to go because you'll have fruit all throughout the growing season. We do can tomatoes, but we eat probably more than we can. So it just depends on you. So look for varieties. Look for if you're looking for a determinate variety, then you need to look for varieties like Early Girl or Celebrity. Those are determinate varieties. They'll produce all their fruit at one time. Indeterminate varieties such as our beefsteak tomatoes here, Better Boys, things like that, are indeterminate. They're going to bear throughout the growing season. Let's talk about a few other things. I got a couple of different tomatoes here. This is a globe tomato. This particular tomato is a Better Boy. It is a globe tomato. If you slice this globe tomato open, you'll see it'll have large seed pockets. You'll slice it and you'll see kind of 4 quadrants of seed pockets there. And it's just a traditional, this is when you go to the grocery store and you buy a tomato, it's normally a globe tomato. This is a beefsteak tomato. If you slice this tomato, you will see seed pockets dispersed all around the fruit. There'll be a lot of small seed pockets. This is a more meaty tomato, kind of hence the name beefsteak. I prefer beefsteak tomatoes for out of hand eating. To me they're just the perfect size for a sandwich or a hamburger. They're great slicers. They're very meaty and it's a very good tasting tomato. For canning, I prefer a globe tomato because they're usually more uniform in size, and they usually work very good for canning. Now there are a couple of other types of there are a couple of other varieties of tomatoes, like these cherry tomatoes, or as we call them here in the South, Tommy Toes. And as you can see, we've got some orange ones and some red ones. Then also, there's also a group of tomatoes that are traditionally used for cooking. Now, these might be Roma tomatoes. Um, in this case, these are culinary blend tomatoes. You can see, but they're sometimes referred to as paste tomatoes. If you're making sauces, things like that, you might want to think about using something like this or a Roma. So determining your variety is all about what you intend to do with the tomatoes. There's lots of varieties of tomatoes to choose from, so find one that suits your need. Let's talk about spacing for a minute. Now, you look at our plants, you can see that our plants are spaced out quite a bit. We have probably about 4.5 foot between our plants in the row, and probably about 5 to 6 to 7 feet between row to row. We do that because we're a little bit lazy. We don't want to do a lot of weeding, so we space everything out so that we can run our tiller between the rows and between the plants. Typically, you want to make sure that your tomato plants are spaced out about 2 feet apart in the rows. And then row to row, you want about 5 to 6 feet. You want to make sure you give yourself enough space so that when the plants are full grown, that you can still get around the plant. I know it seems counterintuitive. I know you want to get as many in as you can, but you really want to kind of keep them spaced out. Remember that that little small plant that you are growing is going to turn into something like this in just a matter of months. So keep the future in mind when you're spacing out your plants. Tip number 5 is something we talked about in the last video. If you haven't seen that one, go back and watch my first tomato tips video. But tip number 5, we talked about a common condition in tomatoes called blossom end rot, and that is where the tomato will start to rot at the blossom end. So this is the stem end of a tomato. This connects to the stem, and this is the blossom. Every tomato starts with a blossom, and this little spot here is where the blossom was. And so blossom rot is where the tomato will start to rot around the blossom. Now, the cause of that is a calcium deficiency. The best way to take care of that is to make sure that you're applying lime to your garden. I recommend that you get a soil test done. Your local ag extension office can give you a soil testing kit. You can send that off for a small fee. They will tell you all of the nutrients of your soil, what you need, and it'll tell you how much lime that your garden needs. The best way to take care of that is get a good soil test done and lime your garden. You want to think of lime as something that you do in advance. It's too late to lime these plants now. Let's say if we had a problem with blossom end rot, it would be too late now to lime. But you want to think about next year. So what we do in the fall when we turn our garden in, we typically will lime our garden. In our area, it's very difficult to overlime. But let's say, well, you say, well, it's too late for that. I've already planted my tomatoes, and I'm getting a lot of blossom end rot. What did I do? Well, you can purchase a product called Rot Stop. That's a spray that you can spray on your leaves that can help that. But you can also give them an antacid. These are calcium carbonate antacid tablets. If you have a problem with blossom end rot and you need a quick fix, put a couple of these in the ground there under your tomato plants. Crumble it up around the tomato plants. This will help. But you need to make sure that you're buying antacids that contain calcium carbonate. These contain 750 milligrams of calcium carbonate. Tip number 6. The best way to water your plants, as some of our viewers have told us, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, is to water the base of your plants. So the best way to take care of that would be to have a soaker hose or drip irrigation system set up. That's one thing we're going to work on next year. Thank you to those viewers who commented that in our last video. And if something I missed this time, if you got another tip for us, leave it in the comment sections. I've got a lot of great ideas from people, and you never stop learning. I said before, my dad, I grew up from the time I was 3 years old around tomatoes and gardening. My dad was a big gardener. Michelle's grandparents and parents were tomato farmers. They raised tomatoes for a living, but there's still a lot that we have to learn. So the final tip that I have for you is to let your tomatoes ripen on the vine. Now, I'm the world's worst, Michelle will tell you. I'll come out here and I'll see a tomato and it's red, it's orange, it's turning. I'm like, oh, let's pick it. But let those tomatoes ripen on the vine. The taste will only improve if you let it fully ripen on the vine, and the taste will be absolutely sublime. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some tips out of this video that you can use in your garden, and I hope this encourages you to get out there and plant something in your garden. If you got some tips for us, leave them below. We'd love to read your comments, and we respond to everyone. Subscribe and click the bell for instant notification when we upload a new video. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. You're awesome.